Now, judges, my name is Ben Yark, and I strongly urge an affirmative vote on the resolution that the United States federal government should place a cap on annual tuition costs to attend colleges and universities. The plan text the United States federal government will implement the United Kingdom's college cap system that caps tuition at around £9,500, or like $12,000 per year. And specifically, normal ways, this will be implemented through normal ways and means, but specifically, the government already subsidizes colleges a lot, specifically $41 billion in funding every year, especially really, really small schools, and specifically already has lots of provisions in place where the Department of Education has the ability to impose price caps on tuition as a condition of receiving federal funding. This means like this program already is in place that like the Department of Education just needs to put the caps on colleges. Specifically, part of this plan means that normal ways and means would scale federal funding and grants to these universities based upon need, which means that like small universities will not be collapsing, but like big universities like Harvard, Yale, etc., will be forced to use money from their endowment. That's just how like federal funding works, at least in terms of like Department of Education. We say like, you're using normal ways and means, and that means you're implementing through the executive branch, i.e., like the Department of Education is implementing the system. That leads us to the way you should be weighing this round. You should be given the word should in the resolution. You should be evaluating this round on net benefits, but predominantly look to structural violence. We say structural violence ought to be preferred for the following reasons. We just specifically define structural violence as like refers to forms of violence wherein a social structure, social institution may harm people by preventing them from meeting their basic needs. Specifically in this round, we say that low-income people not being able to afford education is a form of structural violence, like minorities not being able to afford structural violence. And the reason you're preferring structural violence is because of securitization. The state constructs basic threats to justify continuing structural violence only by strategically intervening in the cycle by calling the state on the bluff that can be disrupt processes of securitization. And that leads us to our sole contention, that is accessibility of education. The overview is simple. People in the status quo can't afford to go to college or universities, or have to rack up substantial amounts of debt, which destroy their ability to have social mobility. Specifically, this impacts on traditionally disadvantaged populations, most thus the emphasis on structural violence. Onto uniqueness. One, college is unaffordable in the U.S. and the status quo. According to data from the College Board, the average cost of tuition fees for the 2021 to 2022 year was $10,000 for in-state students at public four-year institutions and $37,000 for private nonprofit four-year institutions. This does not include additional expenses such as room and board, books, and other fees. And specifically, we see that the same College Board report found that the average published tuition and fees at the public four-year colleges have increased by 70%. Private four years institutions have increased by 72%, adjusted for inflation over the past 20 years. And specifically, according to Forbes, the price of college tuition is increasing at over double the rate of inflation. So this has nothing to do with inflation. This is just like colleges jacking up their tuition because they want to. The CISA point is that the financial aid is non-solvent. According to Forbes, the study financial aid is insufficient for students who are already around the poverty line and status quo, while a study by the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities found that this disproportionately impacts students of color. Specifically, a report by the Institute for Higher Education Policy found that even with financial aid, low-income students often face significant unmet need, meaning that their total cost of attendance exceeds the financial aid that they receive. The report specifically found that 93% of low-income students dependent students had unmet needs in the 2015 to 2016 academic year, meaning they had to find other ways to pay for college. The little I point is that additionally, we see that only 11% of low-income students who are first-generation college students actually get the degree because the vast majority have to drop out because of unmet need. And the DSA point is that college is unaffordable in like literally every college is affordable in like literally every other country. In the UK, college is capped at like less than £10,000 per student per year, which is less than a third for the average rate in the United States. But specifically, we tell you like the United Kingdom has like far like higher like rates of college enrollment, college graduation, and like enrollment by like minorities and like traditionally disenfranchised people. The second uniqueness is that of social mobility is bad in the status quo. The wealth gap is increasing because of lack of access to education opportunities. The average non-grad college family has only 18% the wealth of the average college grad family. This ultimately contributes to poverty and like perpetuates the wealth cycle. For example, the average Black student goes to Harvard, makes over $170,000 per year. So so we specifically see rich colleges like affirmative action policies are not solving for like the structural issues, and also and that's the rich colleges are basically the only place where you get like full rides or where you get like a need-based student loans or like financial aid. The three uniqueness point is that of student debt. We see that students are crippling with debt in the status quo. The average college debt balance is over $40,000, and praise on young students who don't know the interest rates they're signaling up for. Specifically, 43.5 million people owe student debt, and specifically the vast majority of student debt years or even decades post-graduation. And according to globalization.org, student debt exacerbates poverty for millions of Americans, specifically students of color as well. This leads us to links. One, the plan passes. This goes into effect. Two, more students attend college. A 2018 report by the Economic Policy Institute found that earnings gap between high school and college graduates has grown significantly over the past several decades, contributing rising income inequality. The report found that in 2017, college graduates are earned on average 56% more than high school graduates. You're also going to be cross-applying uniqueness point where like people don't attend college or drop out because they like can't pay, or because college is too expensive, especially private schools, because like public schools are often hard to get into, or like don't have the same like economic like advantageous. Three, we see that like colleges are forced to reduce the price of tuition without reduction in operations. Notably, almost all research that is conducted by universities, either funded by the federal government, around 53% of funding, or by like private donors, or like for-profit organizations looking to get research done. Only about like 80% of all research is funded by like undergrad tuition. So there's probably like so the plan probably doesn't reduce any of these things. We also see like it's not going to like have any impact on the UK on like professors and teachers, because one, the federal government is like scaling up like grants and federal assistance to these universities, like to compensate for the college price cap. And additionally, like we see that like in the UK, which and the system was implemented, like professors on average make $96,000 USD every year, meaning they're clearly not struggling that much financially like the UK system, which is basically what we're implementing, is like effective at like retaining like teachers and giving them like living wage. For this, on top of financial aid, will be sufficient. We see that the college is better in the United Kingdom. This is why the average United Kingdom college loan is just a fourth of the US, and default rates and dropout rates are substantially lower. And five is politics. Biden needs a win. Wheeler Project alienated his base. He should implement this incredibly popular bill with Gen Z to make sure that Republicans don't win in 2024. Specifically, needs a campaign strategy that will allow him to go beyond climate, like removing student loans was like really effective at boosting his approval rating. But currently, it's like tied him to the Supreme Court, and there's a high chance that they overturn this specific plan. Like won't have that, because we're like fiat editing into place, and specifically like this will like give Biden the boost he needs, and like actually like give them a point to rally around with. The impacts. One is poverty rates for non-college educated students is over 3 times as high as someone with a college degree. Like specifically, you're going to be extending the cyclical poverty and like generational like harm warrants, like specifically for students of color and low income people. Like this is like really good. The second impact is that of implicate to poverty and structural violence. The second impact is that of politics. Extend Biden needs a win for Democrats to win, or Biden needs a major win for Democrats to win in 2024. And specifically, the impact is the prevention of dehumanization of LGBTQ people community, especially for trans people, and also like being able to fight climate change in the future, which Republicans aren't going to do. Thus, I strongly urge a NAF ballot. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna go definitions, framework, NAGAF. Or actually start with counterplan, then NAGAF. Is anyone not ready?
Wait, how many sheets on the neg?
Like, I don't know, ACLA like on one sheet, but like there's 2 disads and the counterplan. So your discretion. Start time now. Starting the affirmations plan, we're going to contest this plan perfectly. First, they said they're going to compensate all of the colleges exactly for like how much they would lose on how much they make from tuition by capping their tuition. However, we tell you this is simply not possible. First, we tell you that private colleges get very little money from the government. It would be a ton more from the government they'd be getting in order to make up this amount, because they already get so little. The government does not have plans in place to be able to give private colleges this much money. Then we tell you that the government would have to cover over $200 billion to make up for how much public and private schools in the United States make from tuition that they actually need, like specifically for nonprofit colleges, especially who are like using tuition to cover their basic needs. This is over $200 billion that would need to be made up. The United States does not have that much money in their education fund, which means they need to pull it from other funds. This would be a ton of policy work to do. The most likely solution for this to happen in the like immediate time frame, which is like normal ways and means for this to happen, would in fact just be that they put a cap on colleges and continue to pay them the same amount, maybe like give them a little bit more, but they do not have the money to cover how much money they would be losing from tuition. That's why that we oppose this plan to some probability. Then let's go into the neg. Let's go into we agree with their structural violence framework. Now let's go into the neg counterplan. The United States federal government should place a cap on annual tuition costs of public universities. This is specific in that we are only putting this cap on public universities, not on private universities. This leads me into D1, which is economic mobility uniqueness A. Private colleges and universities do not receive much government funding. Specifically, they are reliant on tuition for their cost. That's why their tuition is so much higher, because they do not receive this government funding. And they typically
text and status for the CP.
You want text? Sorry, pause.
Yeah.
What? Text?
Oh yeah, POC, sure. Yeah, just text and status on the CP, like conditional.
Also, how much money are you placing the cap at? You didn't like, what's the number?
Oh, it's still going to be still.
So our number?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool. Okay, you can respond.
It's not. Let me put the text in. Sorry, my partner told me to put that. BFD should place. It's 25,000 on annual. Are you sure? It's 12K. That's what I thought. Oh my God, I'm sorry. I'm in 12K on annual tuition costs.
Okay, so the same as ours. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but it's public university specifically. Okay. Sick. Restarting time now. Subpoint B, the reason why private colleges have so much money is because they charge people who can afford it extremely large sums. If you can't afford, if your family makes $200,000, $300,000 a year, and you can't afford to pay $80K a year for your college, that college is making a ton of money from it. That's why private colleges have as much money. Subpoint C is that many private colleges set up their tuition in a strided system where people with less money pay less. That is through things like the FAFSA. Specifically, 61% of private schools provide need-based aid, and 12% of private schools cover 100% of the need of their demonstrated need of their students. This is very unique to private schools, as many public schools don't give need-based financial aid because they do not have the money to do so. Private schools do because they charge such high funds from the people who can actually pay that, and they don't receive that government funding. That's the only way that they can do that. Now let's go into the links. A, capping private school funds means they do not get the money from people who can actually afford it, which means they do not have the ability to afford to cover the tuition of other students. Specifically, look to the example they give. Harvard, 20% of people attend Harvard for free. 20% of Harvard students attend for $0. That is because they have a ton of money from people who actually have the money to pay to give to people who cannot afford it. Subpoint B is that low-income students will not be able to attend private schools given the high cost of attendance, because the bar for how much they can pay is just going to increase. If there's a cap on how much they can pay at $12,000, but Harvard still expects to make a certain amount of money from tuition that they normally make, then every single student is going to have to pay that $12,000 because they need to cover a certain amount of tuition. Like, right now they're getting 80K from like hundreds and hundreds of students, so they're able to cover 20% of students making $0. Now let's go in to the specific important part here, which is on low-income students. 28.2% of households in the United States have an EFC of $0, meaning they can spend $0 on college. This is because they make less than $25,000 a year in that household. Subpoint C of the link is that by affirming, richer people will go to private schools. However, there will not be options for low-income students to go to private schools, as they will not be able to afford the $12,000 a year cost of attendance because they no longer get to go for $0. Now let's go into the impacts. Number one is this impact is economic striation. One, specifically after 10 years, 75 people who attended private colleges make $75,000 more than people who attend public schools. And that allows for that economic mobility. In the status quo, if you are in poverty, it is much more affordable for you to go to private schools because you can go there for $0. In the affirmations world, the only people who can attend private schools are those who can pay the $12,000 a year cost of attendance, which we tell you is not that many people, because so many people, 28.2% of households and these 20% of kids who are going to Harvard, they would all not be able to go to Harvard. Second, higher education equals more jobs. Kids can't literally just cross apply all of the affirmation analysis here on why it's important for you to go to a private, for you to go to college in order to make money. And we tell you that because public schools don't provide need-based aid, even a lot of them don't provide need-based aid, even a lot of them would probably be about the $12,000 cap. It's important to keep in mind that they are increasing the bottom. Just because they are putting a cap, they're also increasing the bottom amount of people pay. Now let's go into disadvantage 2, which is economic possibility uniqueness A. Currently, 15.85 million undergrad students who pay an average cost of $25,000 a year. That means that colleges are expecting $407 billion on tuition alone to cover their costs. With the cap at $12K for all of these colleges, they are going to have to decrease how much money they spend on the amount of services they provide, the amount of teachers they have, all of that, meaning that they're not going to be able to accept as many kids because they're going to have to cut on resources. Institutions that are nonprofit cannot meet the cost to run at the same capacity that they do now if they're making not making $407 billion on tuition anymore. And this is for nonprofit schools of all kinds. Therefore, we tell you that they're going to choose to cut costs or there's just going to be no low-income students who are accepted into the school. Subpoint D is that colleges are already like having low acceptance rates this year. Like this is only going to decrease the acceptance rate even more. Link 1 is that colleges will not be able to operate with as many kids because they'll have to cut costs. This include private schools are not going to be able to operate because they again do not receive much funding from the government, and they're non-profit. A lot of them are nonprofits, and less kids can go to these private schools. Second, this private schools will collapse because they're not able to run or pay staff. Either one of these things will happen. Either they're going to just not going to have any low-income students, or they're going to collapse because they're not going to be able to run. The impact is lower quality of education, and then less educated students in poverty. Let's go into affirmation case. First, they said like 12 that it's currently 12K for in-state, or it's 10K for in-state. We tell you that their cap of $12,000 is actually more than 10K for in-state tuition, and because they're now going to be receiving so much less tuition from the people who pay the most, we're going to see public school tuition might cause public school tuition to increase, which means more kids would need to go to private schools, but then kids can't go to private schools because the private schools are like also having to be this 12K. So like every school is going to be 12K in their world. The only world that has schools that are less than 12K is our world, because private schools are able to make that bunch of money to then have kids go for $0. Then on students of color being able to go, they said that private schools can't pay, like Harvard can't pay for private schools. We tell you that's not true. 20% of their students pay $0, and their endowment just is not enough to cover the like billions of dollars that they're like paying for tuition. Then they tell you that in the UK, like this is working. However, we tell you one thing that's really crucial to understand about the UK is that the minimum that people can pay in the UK is about £10,000 a year. There is virtually no student attending college for free in the UK. That means they're just raising the bottom. Look to their own example. We see that the floor is simply higher, which means that 28.2% of people cannot afford to go to school. If your EFC is 0, you cannot afford to go to any school in the affirmations world. The only world that provides an opportunity for school is the negations world, where we put that where private schools can cover need-based aid, because again, public schools don't really cover need-based aid. Thus, like more low-income students can go to school, and it protects against economic striation.
All right. Order is 1 U off, then the negation case in order, starting with the CP and the 2 DAs, and then the application order. Give me like 10 seconds to get my sheets in order, and I'll start time. But again, 1 U off, that's going on top.
Oh, sorry. Could you say the rest of the order again?
Yeah, 1 U off, then the neg case, so like CP, DA1, DA2, and then the app case as it was read in the LO.
So to clarify, the F on bottom.
Yeah, app on bottom. And my partner will pass all necessary text, just one thing, but yeah. All right, is everyone ready? Time starts in 3, 2, 1. A is the interpretation. The neg does not get access to a plan plus a counterplan when the resolution is that the United States federal government should place a cap on annual tuition costs to attend colleges and universities. A PIC is defined as the entire plan text plus something or plus something that adds or subtracts an element of the plan. The violation of the negative plan includes a counterplan when they put a price cap only on a specific percentage of colleges, only public colleges. C is the standards. 1, predictability. There's an infinite number of CP, so the neg has 20 minutes to prep for what the debate is actually going to be about. Our prep becomes useless because we can't predict every possible CP. We see predictability is necessary because according to a Stanford study, students who were given given a syllabus at the beginning of a college course did significantly better than students who weren't. So you need predictability to get education. 2, ground destroys all 7 minutes of offense in our case because the neg still garners like 90% of our offense and most of our thing from the first base is essentially useless. By sparing our case, the neg prevents clash and denies the ability to make unique offense within the round. There's reciprocity. The neg can make minor adjustments to the AF. We can too, which justifies intrinsic and severance perms. Debate just devolves back into like picks and then an intrinsic or severance perm, which we say destroys education as well. 4 is topic education. This topic is specifically important to get education, whether or not the topic as a whole is good, not individual tiny parts. So larger topic education or railroad education is garnered from not having picks, the voters. 1, fairness. Arguments used out of the debate round and creates a world where the neg can always win by picking out a small part of the resolution. Even if they don't pick out a small part of the resolution, they can still pick out of some part and only debate half of it. This causes the debate to be a coin flip, which means that there's no reason for us to do the activity at all and it would collapse. 2, education. The whole reason we do a debate is education. The only unique and educational value from debate is clash. So to the point where they don't have to clash with like 90% of our impact just by saying that they solve, or that by only putting cap on half of it, they can still get access to our educational impacts. That means that there's less clash in our round. The Under review, 1, a priori, you should be evaluating the prior question of the debate because we have to establish rules of the game before we can play it. 2, drop the debater because it deters future abuse via norm setting. 3 is going to be competing interpretations because it's the only coherent way to determine a theory shell, because reasonability always collapses right back into competing interrupts. Anyway, this also means that you have to be evaluating potential abuse as well as proven abuse, because if we can say there are competing interpretations, our interpretation is better than theirs, then we can win on potential abuse as well. And 3, no RVIs because it's a chilling effect that deters like legitimate theory and makes sure that abuse like never gets checked back in debate. On to our opponent's case. First, on their counter plan. The overview of the counter plans, you can extend their own analysis onto why like public education does not cost that much money in the status quo, so their counter plan is meaningless. Specifically, we see to the point where they themselves extend our argumentation that the average public school only costs like $10,000. A $12,000 public cap probably does nothing in their world, which means we still get access to all of our impacts. But let's go on to some specifics. Okay, the overview for their like links advantage is that they say that like students are no longer going to get financial aid anymore, and like financial aid is solvent to the status quo, but it won't be in the affirmative world. There's going to be 2 responses. The first response is that you can extend the conceded argumentation that is mostly conceded that financial aid is not solvent to the status quo. Specifically on Harvard, which our opponents bring up, only 7% of Harvard students who are first-gen students are like more than 70% of minority students make over $150,000. So the average minority student or the average like first-generation students already rich in Harvard. More importantly, while near the 2,840 colleges and universities exist in the United States, there are only 75 institutions that claim to meet 100% of demonstrated financial aid in all or many of their statements, so it's already not working. Again, you can extend the conceded, or you can extend a lot of the conceded analysis, which I'll get into later on the affirmative for a uniqueness about how financial aid is specifically not solvent for people around the poverty line. So this is already an issue, and there's probably not going to be able to get worse. But on to their specifics, because they talk a lot about Harvard. We say, again, Harvard is going to be a really, really important part on all around. Harvard has a endowment of literally $50 billion. That is enough to easily cover their tuition costs for like the next multiple decades. So to the point where we say that Harvard is just funneling all their money that they could be using for tuition directly into their endowment and investing more money and becoming even richer. There is no reason as to why we should be prioritizing Harvard over like students being able to afford college. Number 2, you're going to be extending the conceded analysis that in the United Kingdom, the average teacher makes over like $100,000, or significantly more than in the United States. So there's no reason as to why everything's going to have to collapse, because clearly it's enough in the United Kingdom to fund, even in like Oxford and Cambridge and stuff like that, it's clearly enough to fund all their educational programs. So why would they have to collapse here? Number 2, we say there's no reason as to why they're specifically going to get rid of financial aid. Again, they can easily support it with their endowment. It's not just Harvard, it's Yale, it's Stanford, it's all these large public private universities, and the public and the like small private schools also get a lot of like government funding as well. They can still afford this. They like most of their money just goes directly to their endowment and not to their actual running of the
The
campus.
75 schools who actually like pay most of the financial aid get it from their endowment and from private.
Yeah, we say that the 75 schools that that pay most of their financial aid get it directly from their endowment already. So it's not like the financial aid can only come from other students who are compensating. So there's no reason as to why they will have to stop like and bar low-income students from attending. And again, the point where they have financial aid right now, clearly colleges do want in some way like low-income students to attend, or at least like say that they are having low-income students attending. All right. So on the next argumentation, they say that 28% of all households have $0 in college. Again, this is probably an argument for our side, except the argumentation that people in the poverty line, like around the poverty line, the people who would be part of this $0 in discretionary spending are the people who have to go into debt right now. Our opponents don't touch the college debt impact, which is really, really important, because they can see that college debt means people are not going to be able to contribute to the economy later and are crippled with financial debt forever. So the people who have like $0 in money right now, again, they could do like what they do in the United Kingdom. They get significantly less amounts of debt. They can pay them off. That's why there's almost no defaulting on student loans in the UK, but there's very high levels of default in the United States, which is why we're still winning on this advantage. Down to DA2 on econ possibility. Is there anything else, Ben? Okay. So again, they talk about how we're going to need to like subsidize $470 billion in tuition. You're going to be extending the argumentation that to the point where college tuition is increasing significantly faster than inflation. Obviously, they're not like substantially increasing or improving the quality of education in these colleges, which means that all this money is funneling directly into their endowment. Again, this is probably proven by the fact that their endowment, that Harvard's endowment has gone up significantly post-COVID, even though they've claimed that they needed to increase tuition to support their COVID protocols. But no, they've just been funneling it directly into their endowment. So no, they do get $470 billion in tuition, but they don't actually need all that money. They just use it to like fund their rich donor, or to like put it directly into their endowment. Again, they said that we're going to like decrease the amount of spending and decrease the amount of teachers. You're going to extend the conceded UK analysis that the UK didn't have to do this. So why would the US have to do this in our world? And again, the UK probably spends more money on teachers. So like, if anything, they could probably spend more in our world. All right. On to no low-income students. This is the exact same argument. You can cross by the argument as to why financial aid will exist in our world. This probably takes out most of their disadvantage. Again, on private school collapse, no, private schools do not need this money to collapse. Will not collapse because they're not using this money to fund their educational programs. What?
We get 8%.
They only get 8% of their money from actual tuition. Okay, to the point where private colleges only get 8% of their money from tuition. They don't need all this money to fund their programs. They need it for their endowment. They need it for research and stuff, but they can get the money from the government. On to our case. All right. So first, we're going to start with the top of case where our opponents say that that they're contesting it because the Department of Education is not going to be able to pay. Number one, we say that this $200 billion is like a 1/5 of what we spend on the military. So there's no reason why we're not going to be able to pay. You're going to extending the argumentation that Biden really wants a pro-educational policy. So he's probably going to force the Department of Education to do this by executive order. Again, he needs us to win in 2024. That is his entire political agenda. So he's going to be implementing this. Specifically, we say, yes, they can. Our opponents literally say that they can pull from other parts of the federal government. Like, again, with the $1 trillion we spend on the military. More importantly, the Department of Education is pretty well funded and can get more funding if Biden decides to do that.
This program already exists. They're already giving some money.
Also, we say this program already exists because the Department of Education is already giving some money. We're just increasing the amount of money they can give. We say is literally part of the Department of Education directive. All right, on to the actual advantage. So again, their overview of the advantages, they make the exact same argumentations that I already responded to. So cross by all the responses I gave you onto why public school tuition is not actually going to increase. To the point where they don't have any solvency under their counter plan. We have conceded analysis that we are going to be decreasing the wealth gap and specifically decreasing the amount of poverty rate for people of color and low income people in the status quo. That is the highest magnitude impact in this round. You're going to be buying it significantly highly. Onto the argumentation that our opponents make that in the UK there was no financial aid. This is objectively false. You can extend the argumentation that low income people in the United Kingdom do not have to drop out, which would prove to you that they don't need financial aid to get into it, because even if they take a smaller college loan, they don't have to default on that college loan. So even if they're correct on this, yeah. And again, extend the union interest is bad. So again, do not buy the UK advantage because they have significantly lower college dropout rates. So it doesn't matter if the minimum payment is higher. The loans are clearly sufficient if there's no defaulting. So the UK is once again better. We're modeling after the UK vote out.
Okay, so the order is going to be starting on the theory that was just brought up. Yeah, the order is just going to be starting on theory, then moving down. We're going to frontline neg and then app. Is anyone not ready? Okay, I will begin time now. Start with the we meet. Private schools is a very small percentage of U.S. colleges and universities, and the government mainly connects and gives money to public universities. Thus, they're the most likely to apply that the U.S. federal government is going to be giving money to these public universities. For that reason, we meet, and we can see that an app or a neg advocacy isn't really an app advocacy. They're we barely meet, and that it's not really if it's a plan minus, the minus is huge, and that we're not covering much of app ground. But then even if you don't buy this, go to the interp, the counter interp, which is that students should be allowed to run plan minus counter plans. The standards is one, education. The app needs to be able to defend the entirety of the resolution. In this round, the app needs to be able to defend why the federal government should be putting a cap on both public and private colleges. On top of this, their plan they should be able to defend the entirety of the resolution and their plan because that allows for the most clash and provides the most close to real world policy makers. We can see in real world policy, as us debaters, we need to be arguing policy. A policy would be whether or not the federal government should be covering the entirety of tuition of both or putting a cap on public and private universities. Second is ground. The neg needs to have a space in this debate that comes from finding harms in the app and providing an alternative plan. We can see that the neg has done this, and that we found a hole, which is that private universities should not also have this cap. We have given reasons, and then they should be able to defend their entire case. Sorry, I don't have time. And then on top of the ground, app sets a plan plus framework. The neg ground is a counter plan. Don't let the app unfairly take away neg ground to the point where we can't talk about any of what the app talks about because now all of a sudden we're stealing ground. 3 is predictability. The app burden is to defend the entire resolution. So the neg would be able to the neg has to be able to predict their plan and then be able to attack it. And then the app should also be able to defend the entirety of their plan. Not to mention that this isn't a very obscure plan minus. We can see that it's pretty probable that the federal government wouldn't be giving as much money to private colleges. The app should be able to plan to defend both private and public, given that's one of those are the 2 main parts of the resolution. Then onto voters. The first is fairness. Give the neg ground. The app gets the plan. The neg ground is their own plan. In order to have fairness in this round, both sides need to be able to have a plan. So contest resolution in its entirely. Yeah, and then the second vote here is portable skills. Policymakers propose different versions of policies and debate it. Therefore, the app must be able to defend the entirety of the affirmations plan in order to actually have portable skills and have a good, fair debate in this round, because the app needs to be able to defend their entire policy as debaters where we are prepping for policy-making action. Therefore, the app should be able to defend both capping for public and private universities, whereas the neg should be able to have a counterplan where we can attack just part of the app plan. Now moving down the neg case. First on the counter plan, again, like value the counter plan because like it's not abusive. It's pretty clear that like the app was able to get up and give like an 8-minute speech where they were able to find flaws in the neg counter plan, or at least they argued flaws in the neg counter plan, and then we're able to define the app case. Therefore, it's clear we can have a good debate in this round. Now going down the first dissad of economic mobility, the first response here is that financial aid isn't solved in the status quo. We would mention one, the only way that financial aid is actually solved for is when people who live in poverty or people who are coming from the $0 threshold actually have to pay $0. We're going to extend throughout this round that an app ballot means you are raising the floor and less people are actually going to be able to go to college for free. If not, 0 people are going to be able to go to college for free in the app world. That means that neither side can actually solve back for this fundamental issue that people who are like struggling in the status quo and who have a $0 threshold have to drop out of college. We would say that ultimately it's a dissad, right? It gets worse in the affirmations world. However, we would say that right now there are people in poverty who are able to go to college for free and graduate. Therefore, that's a benefit to the status quo and the neg world, whereas the app means that literally nobody can go for free because you have this like baseline of like 10,000 pounds that you have to pay. Then we would also, then on top of this, they mentioned like this debate is talking a lot about Harvard, specifically Harvard, like this endowment of $50 billion. There are a couple of responses here. First, we're going to argue that the endowment runs out after a certain amount of time, specifically when we have this $200 billion that we have to make up. It's only a matter of time before these private universities run out of money. Then on top of this, we would argue that in order for these people in poverty who want to go to these private universities for free and then like get themselves out of poverty, they need the school to actually be good. And we see extend the impacts my partner reads, which is that economic plausibility means that these private universities are going to be a lot worse when all of a sudden they have to take money out of their endowment or out of other avenues in order to fund their own school, meaning they're probably going to prefer having less people attending the university. Sorry, I really don't have time. Then on top of this, they mentioned that like UK solves somehow. So again, just like extend what my partner reads, which is that one, the floor in the UK goes up. People are having to pay more, like the floor, whereas like the average is like goes down. However, it doesn't actually solve back for the structural violence. Again, both sides have agreed to the Wang mechanism in this round of being net benefits specifically on structural violence. So you're basically just going to be voting on who can make sure that the people in poverty or the people where their FAFSA is $0 are able to go to school. And we see that the only side that actually offers for both public and private universities to have this ability is the neg, because we still have these rich private schools who are able to like say, hey, you have to pay $70,000 if you come from a rich family. However, if you come from poverty, you don't have to pay anything. And we see that ultimately an app ballot leads to basically everybody paying the same amount. Therefore, the app ballot is bad for under structural violence. Then the last response here, that people at $0 in the status quo end up in debt, therefore they have to drop out. We would say one, not all people at $0 end up dropping out. Therefore, it's some merit to the neg and the status quo, whereas an app ballot would mean that literally everybody at $0 has to pay something. And then they mentioned that the UK covers debt. We would say that this is extra topical. Whether or not the UK has policies that like cover debt for these students outside of just their cost of attending college is non-topical. We can see in the United States, the actual action is right now, people in poverty pay $0 to go to college, yet they still end up dropping out, meaning that no AF plan is going to be able to actually solve back for this like fundamental issue of people in poverty having to drop out. But we see that like some people in poverty are able to go all the way through school. Therefore, and we extend the reason that they are able to do so is because they pay $0. 20% of households have an EFC of 0. Therefore, vote on the neg to be able to extend that and keep it going in the status quo. Then under our second contention of economic plausibility, the only response here is this money towards endowment. But again, we have $200 billion that is being lost every year because now there is less tuition being paid. That means that the money is going to go towards the people who are originally paying $0 because they have to pay more, or the federal government is going to pay more. And we see that the app argues that this money is going to come out of endowment. One, we argue that eventually it's going to run out. Two, it's not going to cover $200 billion every year. And then on top of this, we would argue, just extend that like poor people are going to have to pay a little bit more. Now going down the apps case. Basically, both sides agree. However, we can put like poor people or people coming from poverty through college, that side is going to win. And we see that like both sides are basically doing the same when it comes to public universities. However, what's unique on neg about public universities is the federal government doesn't have to make up $200 billion. Maybe it's only $150 billion because they don't have to make up the money that private universities are losing with this new cap, meaning that the federal government can now more adequately fund these public schools which are losing this money. Therefore, public schools are made better in the negation's world. and private schools are made better, given that it is not just this haven for the rich, given that everybody has to pay a certain amount of money to go there. Then I guess just extend what my partner reads on their first or on their contention here, which is that students cannot afford, there's no free education in the UK, given that there's basically this minimum of £10,000. The only response here is that low people don't drop out in the UK. We're going to extend that this is for alternate reasons, like the UK being more affordable place to live in, or the government gives more write-offs to people who have debt, or things like that. However, we see in the status quo in the United States, people who are attending college for free aren't able to stick all the way through, meaning that there is a fundamental problem with the United States, and the neg is the only way to keep the cost for people in poverty at zero. Therefore, you're going to side with neg in order to solve this issue of structural violence. Keep the floor at zero and side with side negation.
I'm gonna go after. I'm gonna start theory, and then I'm gonna go neg on weighing. Okay. Start time now. Still extend our theory shell, which is that you should be able to run planning because that is because specifically plan minus counts. That is because the affirmation needs to be able to defend the entirety of the resolution, as that is their burden in the round. The neg has to have be able to have the ground of taking away some portion of the affirmation in order to have it be a real policymaker would do to defend a different part of it. Plus, this is the fact that this is a very small portion of the resolution means that there's still tons of clash in the round. Does not decrease the educational value, in fact, increases educational value because now it's more realistic to real life policymakers where the affirmation has to defend the entirety of their policy. Now let's go on to the actual flowing. First, the keyest piece of clash here would be on what's going to happen to public schools. That is because in the negations world, the private schools pretty much did the same, where they're still making $80K from people who can't afford it, and they're making they are able to then cover the entirety of the tuition of a lot of people at their school. Harvard covers 20%. I know the school I go to covers 23% of students, or I'm going to go to next year. Basically, it's a lot of people get a ton of need. First, on public schools. In the affirmations world, the lowest bar will probably be about the same for the college, in that it's right now it's about 10,000, in there when it's 12,000. The lowest bar is probably going to be about the same for both worlds. However, where they don't provide financial aid, however, those who were paying $80K a year, $50K a year to go to public schools are not going to be paying this. That means that over all universities in the country, if you affirm, the United States federal government would have to pay $200 billion to cover this tuition for everyone. And the affirmation has conceded that the government doesn't have this much money in the education fund, which means that this is simply not possible for them to do, not feasible. They don't get on being able to cover this tuition for all the public schools, which means that the public schools need to make up this tuition somewhere. That means that they are going to have everyone pay this $12,000 a year, meaning no one's going to be getting they're probably not going to be able to find as much merit aid. People are not going to be paying less. They're raising the bar that's the lowest for all public schools. And we see the public schools overall are not going to have as much money. In our world, we see that because the United States federal government is not also covering private schools, for public schools, they're going to be able to cover slightly more on tuition, which means that the public schools are going to have slightly more money to make, maybe they can accept a couple more students, whereas in the affirmations world, they're going to have to reduce how many students they can accept because the amount of money that they have is going to be much lower. So they're going to have a lower yield in how many students they can accept, which means less students going to college. In our world, they could probably accept slightly more students, or they could have some students pay slightly less than $12,000 a year. Basically, in our world, it just makes it slightly better because the United States government gives them slightly more money. However, in their world, we see that public schools had this minimum $12K a year. Everyone pays $12K a year, which means 28% of students can't go to a public school. Even more, 28% of students, remember, have an EFC of $0 in the United States. None of them can go to a public school. But we have some solution. The affirmation has 0 schools that are going to be less than 12K a year because the endowments will run out. And we see that the government doesn't have enough money to cover it. These schools that are nonprofits rely on the money from their tuition. So we see that then in our world, we see that private schools, nothing changes, which means that private schools can still have 20% of students getting their need covered. Even if you buy some of the affirmations advocacy that they still have this endowment, they still have money to give to tuition. One, that money will run out, but two, that means they still have less money because they still are losing $60K a year per student who has the money to pay it. if not more than 60K, 70K. That money is a lot of money that the school is losing, which means that one, either the value of the school is going to decrease, like the quality of the education of the school is going to decrease, meaning that private schools are not going to be able to be this like have this ability to motivate and push economic mobility for the lowest income students. But they're probably also not going to be able to pay for as many lower income students on net, because we are the only side that guarantees that at least some students who have an EFC of 0 are able to afford school. You're always preferring the negation in the world that we see, that every single student who makes who has an EFC of less than $12,000 a year has the potential to go to school at a private school. Whereas in their world, if you make if you have an EFC of less than $12,000 a year, you simply cannot attend school without debt. Do not let them solve for debt, given that they do not access that out. Just because the UK has like a debt relief program does not mean that they get that in their plan. Thus, we see that in our world, we are the only side that ensures under structural violence that those who are most disadvantaged, those who make less than $25,000 a year, those who have an EFC of 0 are able to attend school. That means first generation students attending school. That means students who are primarily disadvantaged economically are able to attend school. Having an EFC of 12K is a very high EFC. Like, this is a large portion of students that would not be able to attend school in their world. That's encouraging strong vote mitigation. Thank you.
All right, I would suggest a new sheet. Is everyone good to get started? Okay, perfect. I guess I'll start with theory quickly, and then most of the other stuff. All right. My time starts now. Kick the theory. We can see that we meet. There's no RVI. They also concede all of our standards. This should be a wash. Onto case. Specifically, there's 3 specific main issues that you need to resolve, and need to resolve. We're winning all 3 of them. First, the question of whether or not the status quo is good right now. The only 11% of first-gen college students get degrees. You're going to be extending this from my first speech, and more specifically, extend the warrant that 93% of low-income students have unmet financial need. This means that the only way out for the negation at this point is to win the counterplan. If I prove that they're not winning, if I prove the counterplan has no solvency, this should be a very easy affirmative vote. Secondly, they can see that only 70 of the 2,800 schools actually meet the full financial needs. This means under their own analysis, they're not sufficiently covering these low-income students, and thus they're likely to drop out. This means you're probably preferring a world that has at least some solvency and now let's look at the question of the CP, the counterplan solvency. Specifically, we tell you to the point in which the counterplan, the cap is only $1,000 lower than the average annual public school tuition. They're not going to do anything substantive, and more importantly, no public school has a tuition cost of $80,000. That's just unreasonable. There's a reason the average is $11,000. Next on the question of empirics. First, they can see that the United Kingdom is objectively successful. This is the world we're modeling after. This is the world that you're going to be flowing this through ink. They just concede the UK. They literally say in the MG or what?
We say in the MG that there's still financial aid.
Yeah, we say in the MG that there's still financial aid in the United Kingdom. This gets conceded. Don't let them pigeonhole our argument by saying that the United K is a bad example. This is literally what our plan text is. Secondly, it is better in the United Kingdom because we see that even if our opponents are correct that there's a floor, extend that the students attending college in the UK Kingdom are able to afford college, even if it's through a significantly smaller debt, because there's little or no risk of students dropping out in the United Kingdom because they can't afford it. Clearly, it is working empirically. This contrasts with the vast majority of students attending private schools, going into substantial debt. Extend the argument that very, very few student schools actually give full rides and for whole meat. Extend that specifically only 70 out of 2,800 schools in the United States have complete financial aid. These are the ones with billion-dollar endowments. They can see that most of the financial aid money comes from endowments anyways, and the colleges don't need this extra tuition to fund the program. So the point in which they concede that the tuition is not funding the financial aid, this should be a very easy ballot and game over for the negation team. This is because you can extend the analysis that Harvard's tuition increase during COVID didn't actually go into implementing protocols, but instead to building new fancy buildings with nice glass roofs. Secondly, on the question of public funding, our opponents say that schools are going to be collapsing because their endowments are going to go down. No, on their new argument that schools will be funded better golden turn this. This is not happening. This what?
It's not happening to status quo in their world. So
Yeah, this is not having the status quo in their world, so it's clearly a wash. Secondly, the extended considered argumentation that Biden will literally do anything for educational funding because it's the only way to win re-election in 2024. Thus, the 200 billion can absolutely come from the military, so they have literally no ink on their plan. And third, the implication of public funding is that we will see no decrease in financial aid because the USFG will just cover this. Again, even if they don't right now, Biden will do anything for education, so he would take money from the military to ensure he wins re-election in 2024. Also, we specifically tell you that like the $60 billion endowment that Harvard has is like plenty enough to cover the like only like whatever 20% of low income students that actually attend the university. This isn't going to change. Like they're not, they're already able to fund like financial aid right now. If you buy none of this, just look at the empirically to the fact that none of the United Kingdom schools have collapsed. The UK pays teachers significantly more than the US, but even with a price cap, they can still afford to operate. All right, now onto the question of impacts. First, you're gonna be extending the solvency that specifically like they don't respond to the argument that like the education department is like can effectively pay for it. They say like there's two specific points of analysis here. First, the analysis that Biden really wants it, so like Biden's definitely gonna push it through. And secondly, they concede the fact that like the Department of Education is already paying a lot of money and giving a lot of grants to these schools. So specifically, this means that this is like very likely to happen. Even if you buy all of our opponents' arguments, we are still winning. Specifically, extend the fact that the status quo isn't working for disadvantaged students. This means on structural violence, we have the highest impact. It is try or die because anything is better than the status quo where only rich minorities can go to Harvard and the vast majority of low-income students have to drop out. Extend the fact that the counterplan has no solvency. This specifically means you're defaulting to the only world in which you have any chance of solvency for these like low-income students under a world of like underworld of the status quo. We are the only ones that actually specifically we tell you what. Also, secondly, we are the only ones with access to politics impact. So the highest probability impact is that Biden wins and wins in 2024 and trans people still have rights. This also implicates the structural violence. Our opponents don't get access to this. They don't try and link in to the point in which if you're confused on where to vote as to who's solving for education better, you're probably going to be voting on this because like it's clean conceded throughout this whole round. Thus, vote F.
Cool, good round. Yeah. I just submitted. Is everyone here?
Nueva's here.
What about South Eugene?
Yes, we are here.
Cool. Great round, everyone. Congrats for making it to the quarterfinals of the TOC. You should be very proud of yourselves. It's a huge accomplishment. With that being said, I'll get right to it. The decision was a 2-1 decision for the government. So Nueva. I think the Anand squirreled, so I think you can go first.
Yeah, sure. So a lot of my reasoning with voting for the negation mainly came down to a lot of the points were about a lot of the points about solvency. Also, I really bought the argument that the negation made in regards to the amount of money that the students who could pay that wouldn't be paying was too much of a hole for the government to just fill, just like that. And ultimately, I thought that the theory debate was also pretty messy, and I didn't really consider that after the AF had kicked it. And just looking at case, I bought that the government would be better able to fund and support the lowest income demographic, and mainly support the structural violence net benefits framework that have been outlined by both sides from the beginning, if the counter plan was implemented and they were only looking at public universities instead of both public and private. So that's mainly where I voted.
I can go next. So I vote F. I'm actually unable to understand what the collapse strategy of either team was. First, evaluate all impacts under the paradigmatic framing of preferring or invalidating only structural violence impacts, given that there was no other framing mechanism, which means even under epistemic modesty, there is basically no other impacts that I can evaluate. I think that this is the least intervention-y thing I can do, given that both teams can see this out of the 1AC and 1NC. And it's extended in the 1NR and 1AR. Not gonna lie, I'm quite confused by the rest of the round, but I'm doing my best to sort through this and intervene as little as possible. I first resolved the uniqueness question. The PMR is extremely clear that currently a bunch of low-income students go into debt, and that even after enrolling there, they default and are unable to graduate. On top of this, like 93% or some big number of people have unmet need, which seems pretty bad to me. I don't know. This, of course, is still status quo uniqueness, so I still need to evaluate how the counterplan generates uniqueness that is then compared to the world of the affirmative. This is hurting my brain, but the way I evaluate this is as follows. First, the only link differential on structural violence between the AF and the neg is whether capping private schools at 12K will lead to impoverished or first-gen folk not being able to end college. This means I'm physically measuring the amount of people who are either being benefited or hurt by each policy. Two, the only reason why private schools would be unable to fund this new floor of tuition or give the same amount of financial aid would be if A, they literally run out of endowment money, and B, the Department of Education is like, lol, sucks to suck, you don't get any money. I think I air F on both these questions because A, the PMR goes for this conceited argument that like most of private university money doesn't come from tuitions, but comes from like billion-dollar endowments, which but also doesn't extend the actual statistic. I don't know, which means that instead of spending a bunch of money on lots of random nonsense like shiny buildings, they'll just move that money to tuitions. Even if I don't buy this, they can just even if I don't buy this, I'll buy that. Even if the app doesn't get to fiat giving money to universities, the app does get to make normal means arguments that since they're already giving grants, they can just increase the amount of money that they give by taking from the military. How this is normal means is beyond me, but it's conceded, I guess. So $400 billion magically gets filled by either endowments or the military. I also think that the app is just wrong about endowments. I talked about this in my RFD, but this doesn't really affect my decision. Okay, 3. So cool. Now private universities can spend money through endowments. This resolves all of the increasing floor claims and just means that simultaneously the people who were getting college for free still get college for free, but also people who are getting college through debt either have lower debt or no debt at all. This is kind of unclear, but seems to be that the story is that the AF is going for and seems to be the only other link differential between the AF and the neg, given that the MO doesn't really tell me to judge kick the counterplan, but simultaneously is trying to go for the counterplan. Which means that this is probably where I can vote. And then lastly, the tiebreaker that the PMR tries to go for is that Biden is going to win, but doesn't do any impact calculus or weighing on how this falls under structural violence, which means I legit think I can't vote for this. I don't know, man. I think this makes sense, but if you want to post, John, I'm open to it as well.
I am also willing to echo some what Tay just said, but I'd like the recording to end before I do.